Aviation fans, welcome back to another episode of Imperial Diecast. I apologize for not having reviewed a plane in a while. I mean, it's been almost 6 months, hasn't it? But in the last couple of months, I've reviewed cars, and now I want to return to planes a little bit again. So, in today's review, we're going to be taking a look at a 1/500 scale Air India Boeing 707-300 made by Herpa. Now, this is what the box looks like, and you can see that I managed to get this for €10, which is really a good deal. This is Herpa catalog number 503259. At the back, we do not get any information about the plane's real length and stuff, which usually you'd find here. So anyway, let's get unboxing. And here's the plane. And here it is. The Air India 707-300. Let's talk about Boeing quadjets. Before the 747, there was the 707. Now, this was not the first commercial jetliner, as that would be the de Havilland Comet, but this was Boeing's first commercial jetliner, developed from the Dash 8 prototype in the mid-1950s. It's a long-range narrowbody, meaning only one aisle, which these days are only for short-haul flights, with a 6 abreast seating, a layout that was then carried over to other Boeing narrowbodies like the 727, 737, 757, and, matter of fact, there was even a shortened fuselage version of the 707 called the 720. Pan Am was the first to begin service in 1958, but Air India got its first 707 just 2 years later in 1960. But I think those early variants were Dash 100s, which not only had a shorter fuselage, but also less range. This Air India 707, however, is a Dash 300, whose first flight was in 1965. And the 707 remained in production until 1979, after which widebodies like the 747, DC-10, L-1011, and A300 took over long-haul flights for the next decade, the 80s, after already having established themselves in the 70s. But that doesn't mean the 707 isn't flying anymore. In fact, Boeing still uses them as the E-3 Airborne Warning and Control System, shortened AWACS, for military reconnaissance. So we'll start off by taking a look at the L1 door, and you can see that it has a porthole and a little extra detail at the bottom where the emergency slide would deploy. And underneath that, we also have another little area which is colored differently compared to the rest of the fuselage. So I'm not sure what that is. And then, of course, we have the Indian flag. And it says Air India here. And in English and in Devanagari. And underneath, we of course have the window line, which is surrounded by a red trim that starts from the front of the aircraft and goes over these two emergency doors all the way to the back, where we also have the Victor Tango Delta Sierra India registration. And we then have the L4 door. A closer look at the vertical stabilizer reveals the old Air India logo, which had a centaur string and a bow. The vertical stabilizer is made out of plastic, unfortunately. However, it has some nice detail in the form of this thing that is protruding in front of the tail, which is a high-frequency radio antenna. And while it won't hurt you because it's made out of plastic, it will bend easily, so be careful. And taking a look at the horizontal stabilizers, you can see that they have the elevators carved into them, but otherwise there's really not much detail. And now taking a look at the wings of this plane. So the wings have a basic level of detail in the form of the flaps, slats, and ailerons, air brakes, and all that stuff carved into them, but otherwise are just bare metal. And the way you can tell this is a Dash 300B is because the wings have two trailing edge kinks and not just one. Now this 707-300 was made in the mid-2000s, but in 2013 Herpa also released an Air India Boeing 707 as a Dash 400 variant, identical to the Dash 300 in fuselage length, but fitted with different engines, namely Rolls-Royce Conway 508s. And that model was released under a different Herpa catalog number, namely 524681. And with it being a more recent release, it has more details, but it also is more expensive. So let's go through some of the differences, with the most obvious being that the windows have silver frames, which of course makes them stand out from the red trim and a lot more visible. Further details come in the form of landing gear doors, which mine doesn't have. The aircraft name being written underneath the cockpit windows. The aircraft type specification written behind the L4 door. The vertical stabilizer being made out of metal instead of plastic, so no risk of it yellowing over time, and more detail on the wings, like overwing registration, emergency exit markings, all the good stuff that is missing on this older model. But like I said, I got this model for €10 and the new one retails for 26. And it's still missing landing lights, which you only get on the in-flight 500 Air India 707-300. Now, one more thing I like about this old casting is that the wings seamlessly meet the fuselage, but on the new Dash 400 casting, there is a more noticeable gap. Something that's weird, and something that I'm just noticing right now, is that the number one engine, the one on the very right, has a different looking pylon compared to all the other engines. Why is that? Is that a casting mistake by Herpa? Because in the screenshots I showed you earlier that show re-releases of this model as the Dash 400, the same mistake, if you will, has been carried over. Other manufacturers in 1400 like Gemini Jets also seem to replicate this mistake. So weird. Let's look at the engine detail on this one though. These are Pratt & Whitney JT3Ds, giving the Dash 300B a range of 9,300 kilometers. These engines are tiny because back in the day they used to use low bypass engines, and what that means was pretty much all the air that was sucked in by these fans was mixed with the fuel and then ignited to produce thrust. As aviation developed over the years that followed, engineers figured out a concept called high bypass, where wider engines would suck in larger portions of air but only have them bypass the combustion chamber, and in doing so would produce quieter engines because this slower, far less thrust-producing secondary airflow would wrap around the primary airflow and mask its noise. Now the fan blades are missing, which is not so good, but on the other hand, since they're low bypass engines, you won't really notice it. Now the Boeing 707 was, just like the Douglas DC-8 and Convair 880/990, a smoker, meaning its engines used to leave behind black contrails. Well, not black, but more of a brown haze. And taking a closer look at the cockpit, you can see that the cockpit windows resemble the Boeing 737 a little bit because it was developed from this one. We get a black radome, as was customary for planes back in the day, and a little bit of black paint underneath the windows to shield the pilots from sunlight. And there's also eyebrow windows up top. And here's a look at the other side of the plane, where you can see that this plane comes with cargo doors, both at the front and at the back. So that's nice. And it also has the new landing gear, so not the old clunky stuff from the 90s anymore. So that's nice. And now taking a look at the bottom of the plane. You can see that it does say Herpa in the middle, which is good, and we also have some underwing detail in the form of these, well, flaps, I should say. There don't seem to be trailing edge fairings, though, which is interesting. And of course, you can see the mountings of the engines, or the engine pylons, I guess. So yeah. Now for the comparison, I have here a Boeing 747-400, which of course is pretty much identical to the Dash 100, with the exception of the winglets and more windows up top. But you can see just how massive it is compared to the Boeing 707, even though both are the exact same 1/500 scale. It just goes to show how much air travel grew within the next decade that followed, that by the 70s, they really could get away with building such a huge plane to be able to fit all the passengers that were traveling across continents. Pretty amazing history. I hope you guys liked my review of the 1/500 scale Air India Boeing 707-300 by Herpa. I think the 707 is a cool plane, and if you're interested in more reviews like this, make sure to check out some of the other ones that I have. So, take care, have a wonderful day, and this is Imperial Diecast, signing out.